Good morning. Please welcome California Food and Agriculture Secretary Karen Ross.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here. It truly is my pleasure to welcome you to the Governor's Conference here at the Academy of Sciences in San Francisco. What an awesome facility. I hope you all had a chance to go and see some of the exhibits. For me, it was very exciting when I walked in today to see so many friendly faces and to see the diversity of the audience that we have here. I saw business representatives, environmental representatives, some of my friends from agriculture, insurance, community-based organizations, public health groups, local and state government. We really have convened all of the people that we need to be here today for this very important topic, because we know that success will require all of us to collaborate and work together for our future. I'm pleased to announce that today, in addition to the 250 diverse leaders that we have here in this room, we're also streaming this on the governor's webpage so that all Californians have the opportunity to participate in this very important discussion. I'm sharing emceeing duties with other administration appointees here today, so you'll hear from several of us throughout the day as we introduce our speakers and keep the day moving. That's our most important thing, right, Secretary Laird? On that note, I am the person. I could have singled out Secretary Rodriguez, but, you know. I do have a few logistical announcements. You know, somebody has to, at the beginning of the day, go through some things. First of all, everyone should have a conference folder which has your agenda and biographies for all of our speakers. We're going to keep the introductions very brief so that we can spend our time today really delving into the details of our program. Now, in this folder, you'll also see that there are small note cards. Now, you could use those in two ways. You could do one thing, make notes to yourself, books to read, articles to look up, things to do. But what we really want you to do is during the presentations today, if you have questions, please write them down and then hold them up, and we have ushers who will collect those for you. So please take advantage of that. What's really cool about doing a conference in the 21st century is technology, so that everyone, whether they're here or across the state of California watching this being broadcast, can also participate with questions. And here's what you do. If you have wireless devices here, or you're at home or in your office, please just email your questions to questions@gov.ca.gov, and we'll share those with the panel moderators as well. So this really is a completely inclusive event. Now, the final two very important logistical points. Restrooms are located on this floor and up on the third floor. And lastly, please, this is your opportunity, out of respect for all of our terrific speakers, take your electronic devices out and either turn them off or put them on mute, please. We really appreciate it. It can be very distracting for our speakers. Now, with those very important logistical announcements, I'm really pleased to introduce our host today, Dr. Greg Farrington. Dr. Farrington serves as Executive Director here at the California Academy of Sciences. Under his leadership, one of California's most loved institutions has set a bold course into the new century, bringing innovative programs to the public in the world's largest LEED double platinum certified building, rated both for its uniquely sustainable construction and its sustainable operations. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Farrington.
Yes, welcome to the California Academy of Sciences. Do you know this place was founded in 1853? It's probably California's first major research center. When many people around here were rushing for gold, we were rushing to explore the ecosystems of California and the world. We were rushing to find frogs, you might say. We were studying climate change when people still thought of it as weather. It's called being ahead of your time. Some people call the Academy a natural history museum. I think of it very differently. I think of it as a global future institution, because this place is all about two of the most important questions of our time. First, the nature of life. How did we get here? And second, the challenge of sustainability. How are we going to find a way to stay? By the way, life will survive. It's the people who are at risk. These are big questions. They're driving science and technology forward all over the world. And California, in particular the Bay Area, is the center of that activity. For example, just up the hill at UCSF, scientists are working to understand the mechanisms of life, of DNA, so that we can engineer it. Think about those outcomes. At the same time, we just passed 7 billion passengers on Spaceship Earth. They all want to eat and lead good lives. We have to find a way to make the supplies on our spaceship last. There won't be any refueling from outer space. But if it happens, Virgin will do it, I'm sure. Most importantly, we better find ways to increase our supply of energy and the efficiency with which we use it without trashing the atmosphere more than we've succeeded in doing already. These are big challenges. They have to do with modest issues like human survival. But they're also full of technological possibility. They beg us to be creative. Science and technology are more global than ever before. If we don't invent the future, you can be sure that others will and reap the benefits from leading the way. So we're faced with several choices. One is to stick our fingers in our ears, hum very loudly, and go into deep denial. We can deny the need to use resources efficiently and deny the reality of climate change. We can just shout, drill and burn, I suppose. We can pretend that it's morning in America and all will be well as long as we hum loud enough. That doesn't make much sense to me. It's not right, it's not ethical, and it's certainly not pragmatic because it guarantees that we lose. Another choice is to shout, stop the world, freeze development, stop change. That choice won't work either. Much as though I'm a great supporter of environmentalism, the movement gets a bad reputation when it focuses on words like stop, no, can't, shouldn't, and pull up the gangplank. Our smartest option is to realize that we're facing major problems, but also a lot of opportunity. Solutions to our problems will come from words like imagine, create, invest, can, and will. Our best choice is to innovate our way out of the situation we're in. We have to find ways to live on our spaceship and provide opportunity for all of its passengers to thrive. There's a great deal of opportunity to be seized, creativity to be activated, and progress made. Fortunately, we all have brains. The gold worth rushing for today is the gold in smart heads. And in case you didn't know it, creative minds start out by being curious kids. Kids are our greenest and our most important and renewable resource, and they run on peanut butter. They will create the future. We waste their minds at our peril, and the key to activating them is education. That's another thing we focus on really hard here at the Academy. It's education. Activating curiosity, turning on minds, booting up brains of all ages. So welcome to the Academy. Take time to wander around at lunch. Everything's up and waiting for you. The penguins are ready. The fish are swimming. The penguins have a synchronized routine. Check it out. Come back again. In fact, come back frequently. Make coming back easy. While you're here, become members. We have a special deal today. Memberships are on sale at full price. So get them while they last.
Thank you, Dr. Farrington. I think you set the stage for a great day. We're very thankful for the Academy's sponsorship of this event today, and we also appreciate the support of the following foundations who truly have helped make this conference a reality, because we know it takes a lot of resources to bring these people together. So please hold your applause while I go through the entire list. The California Ocean Science Trust, the California Sea Grant, the Energy Foundation, the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, Rockefeller Brothers Fund, the San Diego Foundation, and USC Sea Grant, University of Southern California. Thank you all so much for your support. also my honor to introduce a few of the dignitaries that we have with us today, and these are those who are registered when we got started, so I'm sure that if there are others who come in during the day, they'll be introduced later. We have our California Insurance Commissioner, Dave Jones. Thanks for having a name so easy to... I can pronounce that one. We have Senator Kevin De Leon, who may not be here yet, Senator Fran Pavley, Assembly Member Nancy Skinner, Assembly Member Das Williams, and we have from other countries visiting us here today, Consul General of Canada, Cassie Doyle, Consul General of China, Gao Zhansheng, and Consul General of the Netherlands, Bart van Bolhuis. Thank you so much for joining us today. As you know by now, this conference brings together state leaders to confront the risks of climate change, particularly those that are unpredictable and extreme weather events here in California. We know why we're here, but we wanted to provide this video to help set the stage on the general subject. So please join me in watching a video to help bring the topic for today into focus. And I want you to know that this is from an NBC Nightly News piece that ran just this last week. If we could please have the video now.
As we near the end of the year, the people who keep track of the nation's weather say 2011 will go down as a record breaker for a lot of reasons. Among them, lives lost and dollars spent. At least a dozen extreme weather events this year have each cost $1 billion or more. Here's NBC's Tom Costello.
No one who lived through the tornadoes this spring had ever seen anything like it. From Virginia to Alabama, 748 tornadoes in April alone, and then Missouri.
There's St. John's Hospital. You can see how damaged it is from up here.
And the E5 that tore through Joplin. 160 people died in Joplin on May 22nd, the seventh deadliest tornado in history.
Oh, they just pulled out their dog, right? That is great.
The first 5 months of 2011 had already proven to be record breakers. It only got worse.
When you go back and look at the Groundhog Day blizzard and just pretty much go right through the spring weather, severe weather season, and then into the hurricane season, we've had a horrible year.
In all, nearly 3,000 monthly weather records have been broken so far this year, with NOAA estimating the country sustained 12 weather disasters that cost at least $1 billion or more each. That breaks a record set in 2008 with 9 such disasters.
All that should be underwater.
First drought, then wildfires ravaged Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. From the Dakotas to the Gulf Coast, massive flooding caused catastrophic damage. Then in August, Irene raked the East Coast.
The sand is like a sandblast.
North Carolina was hit first, then New Jersey, New York.
Whoa, look at that.
And Vermont. Climatologists blame climate change and shifting global weather patterns for the extremes. And more could be on the way.
Everything we know about the climate system and its physics say that we will see more frequent extreme events of greater severity and intensity.
Roughly 1,000 people have died so far in this year's weather disasters. They've cost an estimated $52 billion, but communities are still counting. With the impact zones so often at the intersection of Mother Nature and a growing population, a warning that it could get even costlier and more deadly. Tom Costello, NBC News, Washington.
That's sobering, to say the least, and certainly for me gives me a sense of urgency that we work together to confront these challenges. Now, that was on a national scope, but we're here today to focus on California, what we can do to plan, to adapt, and to be prepared. We're quite fortunate in this state to have a leader that is no stranger to confronting challenges. From California's energy crisis 30 years ago to the state's current budget shortfall, Governor Jerry Brown has never been afraid to take on the tough issues head-on. He continues to be an international leader on so many issues, including combating climate change and transitioning to clean energy. His creative thinking and his bold leadership are well suited for these challenging times. Please help me in welcoming Governor Jerry Brown to the podium.
Thank you, Karen, and thanks to all of you for being here and being a part of this conference. We've set it in motion to wake people up, to concentrate our own minds on what the threats are of climate change and what we in California can do about it. California has been a leader right from the beginning, whether it's the gold rush or the movie industry or the airplane industry or now renewable energy, solar and wind and medical advances. This state has been a pioneer, an innovator, a creator. And we're going to need all of that skill and all of that imagination as we confront a world that's changing. And perhaps the greatest obstacle we face is a deep sense of complacency, a sense that, well, things were this way yesterday, they're okay today, and it'll continue. But we know from any study of history that extreme events do happen. Even in our own state here, people were living for over 10,000 years, and the native peoples. And then visitors came from another part of the world, and within a relatively short number of years, 85% of the tribes that had been functioning for 10,000 years were dead, gone. Things happen. More recently, we look over to Europe. Things looked pretty solid a few years ago, and now people are pulling their hair out about how the Eurozone is going to function. Things go along until they don't go along. And the great difficulty is to be able to see what's not completely obvious. And in the case of the buildup of greenhouse gases and climate change, we see it. It's pretty clear. 97% of the scientists who research climate change are people who, from their own understanding of the science, are completely convinced that greenhouse gases are associated with climate change and global warming. There are 3%, and when I say 97 to 3, that's what it is. I'm talking about the people who publish in peer-reviewed journals. 97% of them support the science. 3% are what you'd call skeptics. But when you go to the political class, then it's a very different thing. We have an entire political party that, as a doctrine, at least in recent years, is in absolute denial. And if you look at the press in a number of countries, look at the internet on any given day, and you're going to see denying articles coming out of Australia and Canada and the United States and other parts of the world. But all the denial in the world doesn't change the facts that greenhouse gases are building up, and that there is a wide consensus among thoughtful people. And even though the deniers and the skeptics create quite a propaganda campaign, I have met a number of these scientists. They are cautious, they're not given to exaggeration, and they're looking in minute detail at all the aspects of the change in the climate due to the presence of human beings. And certainly the experiment of having 7 billion people, 1 billion cars, and I don't know how many coal plants and other fossil fuel production facilities never happened before. And from what we know, we got to change. We have to take measures. Now, it's not happening. The Kyoto Agreement is falling apart. The U.S. Congress cannot reach the requisite number of votes to do anything serious. So it's up to the states. And that's why I wanted to do this conference, because I know California has been a leader, not just in the last year or two, but over a number of years. I want to intensify that, keep it going, and build on the momentum to wake people up to take the steps we have to take, because that's always the difficulty. It's easy to go along when everybody's on the same page. Today, there are powerful, wealthy, organized forces that want to crush any effort to cope with climate change. That's the denial. And how we deal with that's a real question. One thing is pretty simple. We know, the United States spent this year almost $500 billion on burning oil, buying and burning oil. $500 billion. We know that we have renewable resources that, while they're going to take money to invest in, over time we can cut that cost. We can cut the flow of money to regimes in other parts of the world that are risky and dangerous. And that makes a lot of sense. California is on its way to having 1/3 of its electricity from renewable energy. Now that makes a lot of sense economically, makes a lot of sense from the point of view of climate change, and we have to make that investment. And we have to go against those who say no. One of the think tanks, the Cato Institute by name, has had speakers say that environmentalism is a greater threat to capitalism than Marxism itself. That's their fundamental position. The notion that you have to take into account externalities, as the economists call them, or environmental impacts, is dangerous because it says not only supply and demand, but there are other considerations that you have to take action on. And that's pretty simple to me, because we always have a balance between the market and customs, morals, norms, and yes, laws and rules. And we try to balance the creativity and the dynamism of the private market with fundamental norms that keep our traditions and our environment intact and healthy. So looking ahead, our biggest problem, Roosevelt said, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Well, the main thing we have to deal with in climate change is the skepticism, the denial, and the cult-like behavior of the political lemmings that would take us over the cliff. And so, accustomed as I am to controversy and going against the grain, I intend to persevere with all that I have to make sure that we take reasonable, thoughtful steps. And while the other side, which is certainly a cult, thinks that what we're doing is cult-like, well, I know something about cults. I don't know whether I'd say my Jesuit experience was a cult experience, but it was dogmatic, somewhat one-sided to say the least, and not particularly open to contrary opinions. So that is not what climate science is all about. Climate science is about observation, experimentation, a vigorous, honest exchange worldwide. And it's quite incredible what the panel on climate, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has produced. So we know the issues here in California. The snow is melting quicker. That's been a nice service of nature to build up that snow, keep it there, and then gradually melt it, have the water flow down in an orderly fashion. Well, as that diminishes, we get floods, we get pressure on the levees can break. Bad, real bad. The incursion of salt water into the fresh water, we all take it for granted. You brushed your teeth this morning, you turned on the tap. Well, all of that takes engineering, it takes dealing with nature in a way that manages things for our benefit. Climate change is going to make it tougher. As sea level rises, we're going to have to adapt. And sea level is rising and will continue to rise. Because by the time the United States government and the Chinese government, the Indian government, all the others get their act together, there will be much higher concentration of greenhouse gases. Sea level will rise. The fire season, which is already lengthened in California by a month, it'll get more, and we're going to have to put more money into protecting ourselves, whether it's the San Francisco and Oakland airports that will be underwater during extreme weather events, or it's the Oakland Hills that already had over 2,500 houses burned down. I'm not saying that was global warming, but it's the kind of thing that will happen with increasing regularity. This is going to cost money. And the longer we wait to reduce carbon emissions, then the more expensive the mitigation and the adaptation is going to take. And that's why we have to pull together and do everything we can to wake people up. By the time everything is obvious, your options are reduced. When your options are greatest, your knowledge and information is not as high. So we have to be able to act with some uncertainty. We do that. When we buy insurance, we don't think things are going to necessarily happen, but if there is a chance that a house will burn down or that a car will crash, we buy insurance. And dealing with climate change should be looked at within that context. We know there's a risk. What the exact percentage is, people can argue, and we don't actually know. But we know the risk is real, the cost is huge and growing, and therefore taking a sequence of realistic steps just makes sense. And that's what we're going to do in California. Whether it's our low fuel standard, whether it's our cap and trade program, whether it's our fuel efficiency standards on cars and buildings, we're moving forward. And the purpose here is to continue the dialogue and the discussion, to refine our knowledge, to support those who are doing the research, and not to beguiled or to lose heart from the skeptics and the deniers. They're there. They have billions of dollars at their command, but I can tell you from this day and from this state, we will fight them every step of the way until we get this country and this world on a sustainable path forward. Thank you.
Well, I can say it. That was terrific. Thank you. He's got us ready to roll up our sleeves and go to work. It's my pleasure to introduce our first panel and invite them to take the stage at this time. I will start by introducing the moderator and then turn it over to her. It really is an honor today to have Felicity Berenger serve as our moderator for our first panel, and I am really looking forward to this, and I know you are too. Ms. Berenger has served as a national environmental correspondent at the New York Times since 2003. She joined the paper as a contributing correspondent in Moscow in 1986 and has held an impressive range of responsibilities at the Times since that point. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Berenger and her panel to the stage.
Thank you all very much. I want to make sure the microphone is working. And it's, as usual, easy to say that people need no introduction, but I just wanted to say very briefly on a personal note, Governor Brown, when you ran for president the first time, you came to the Maryland suburbs of Washington on a campaign event. I was then a cub reporter at the Washington Post, and I remember as my colleague Cynthia Gorney and I went out to watch you campaign, we came back in a car together, and she said, "He's fascinating." And so I've been following your career since then.
That was a long time ago.
Dr. Pachauri, we have met here and there. I welcome you. I note from the notes on the program that it's been in this coming year will mark the 10th anniversary of your time as chairman of the IPCC and the 5th anniversary of the award of the Nobel Prize. And it's been a fascinating if not always comforting 10 years.
Thank you.
Sir Richard Branson, I don't want to talk about space this time round, although, well, maybe I do, but I just don't think it would be appropriate. But I would say on a personal note that since Virgin America went into business, it has become, for my husband and I, one of our two favorite airlines. We do a lot of travel in the West, and Southwest is great. And if I ever took it on myself to occupy someplace for whatever reason, I would choose your terminal here at San Francisco.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. So we're going to begin. I have encouraged everyone to keep it short and to butt in, and if people go a little long, I may butt in myself. It's a word of warning. Dr. Pachauri, you've just come back from Durban, and when people are talking about the impacts of climate change worldwide, there's a natural focus on an island nation like Tuvalu, on a low-lying country like Bangladesh, or on sub-Saharan Africa, where many people say we're already seeing climate refugees. Right now we're in California. This is the 8th largest economy in the world. Are there climate refugees in California now? And if not, when will there be? And Governor Brown, please feel free to join in.
Well, of course, the impacts on the low-lying coastal areas of the world and the small island states are certainly very serious in respect of sea level rise. During the 20th century, we had average sea level rise of 17 centimeters. However, as far as California is concerned, as we brought out in a recent report that the IPCC has produced, and all over the world, you will have an increase in heat waves. In fact, we have said that if action is not taken, then those heat waves which occur once in 20 years now will, before the end of this century, occur once in 2 years. And we've also said that there's now growing evidence that there are going to be more frequent extreme events in terms of precipitation. Heavy rainfall in a short period of time, and that's going to get much worse. Now, the implications of that are very serious. I mean, the governor mentioned the problem with the levees and so on and so forth. In addition to the melting of the snow, if you get heavy rainfall in a short period of time, you can think of the kinds of consequences that people downstream are going to face. So California will also be affected in terms of agriculture, and there will be all kinds of other impacts that people in this state, which has been a leader in several respects, ably governed by our governor, need to wake up and do something about. And I think you have to remain in the lead. As Mahatma Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. If California leads, I hope the rest of the world will follow.
Governor Brown, are there climate refugees in California?
Well, I don't know whether you say refugee, but the fire season is longer, the snow belt is more rapid, and that affects people. There are studies that are showing now that the wine industry, the premium wine industry, is going to be affected. Droughts have already affected farm workers and their employment. Very unusual unemployment rates in the Central Valley that are due to the drought. So what we have is I don't think that was me, was it? An extreme noise event, yeah. We know, when we saw the film on the tornadoes and the fires that have happened in California, all of that we know is going to happen more frequently. And we know each of those cost a lot. 11 or 12 events, extreme events in America costing more than $1 billion. Our own, just in California, we had these severe winds that put people's electricity out for a week. That's going to cost us, that's $50 million, a small event. But as this stuff happens more and more, you get the victims and you get the costs, and the quality of life diminishes. Now, we've seen in some countries, you just look at Greece, they borrowed a lot of money, they dug themselves in a hole, and trying to get out of it through more austerity, things get worse. Well, there's an analog there to the environment. If, as the weather becomes more extreme, and whether it's the airports going underwater a certain number of days during the year, this, to overcome it, costs tens of billions of dollars, and we don't even know the full cost. So it's just a simple matter that we have to take into account what's happening and then take the sequence of most practical steps going forward. That's what it is. But California is not immune. The drought will cost people jobs, livelihood. I mean, we already have a high unemployment rate. Everything is going to get tougher. And as things get tougher, people tend to get nastier. So we have this kind of la-la feeling. I think it's out there, not people who have lost their homes or their jobs, but I don't think we get, it's very hard to imagine that what isn't. It goes against the grain. We like to kind of keep the ball rolling as it is. And the challenge here is to imagine what could happen and then take reasonable steps that we can make. And Governor, right now, the biggest problem, we got to deal with denial.
If I could interrupt, Governor, just
sure.
one second quickly. What's your priority, mitigation or adaptation, in terms of where you put the state's
My
money?
priority is to make California the leader in renewable energy and
so
efficiency.
Mitigation.
Yeah, mitigation is one of those Latin root words that I never.
You don't like the Jesuits gave it to you?
I don't like mitigate it. I want to say California is going to become the leader in solar, in efficiency, in electric vehicles, in low carbon standards, in intelligent, wise land use. That's what we want to do.
And in emergency services?
Well, we'll do that too, but that's always kind of after the fact. We'll have to take care of that because we already have a budget deficit, and it will grow. And people in the school, I mean, we're squeezed. And I said, and it's not a nice thing, people get nastier, as Thomas Hobbes talked about in The State of Nature. Short, nasty, and brutish. Well, we want to avoid that. But if we don't do anything about climate change, we're going to have to all reread the Leviathan, and we'll need a Leviathan to deal with it. And that's big government. So let's take little government steps sequentially, and we may be able to avoid the big Leviathan.
Sir Richard, business, I won't say it's been thought of by outsiders as necessarily nasty and brutish, but it has been thought of as something that gets to the heart of a risk, looks at it, and finds an opportunity there. You've had a couple of initiatives working on turning the risks of climate change into opportunities. Can you talk about them briefly, and particularly about the biofuel link-up between airlines and available biofuel sources?
Yeah, well, I think since governments have not got their act together, generally, with maybe California being the exception, it's up to businesses to step in and see what we can do. So we've set up a number of initiatives. The profits we make from our airlines, thank you very much for your kind words, 100% of those, all the money that we take out, we invest in trying to develop clean fuels. And we pledge to do that over the next 10 years. And we've had some exciting breakthroughs. I mean, in the companies that some of the companies we've invested in. So, algae-based fuels for planes, isobutanol-based fuels for planes. A company in New Zealand, a really exciting breakthrough, which is the carbon that goes up the chimneys of steel plants and aluminium plants. They're turning that into alcohol and then into aviation fuel. And you're talking, that there's enough steel plants and aluminium plants to cater for pretty well every single aeroplane that flies today. So a wonderful way of recycling. The exciting thing about the aviation industry, unlike some other industries, is that there's only 1,800 fuel pumps around the world to fill up. Once some of these companies become the winners and can say, I can produce enough fuel to fill up your fuel pumps, the aviation industry, I think, could go from being a dirty industry to being one of the cleanest industries in the world. And I actually believe that we can pull that off in a handful of years, not the next sort of 20, 30 years, and that we'll start. The algae and the isobutanol and all these different things I've talked to you about, they're working. Planes can fly on them, So in that particular industry, I think we're going to see some great excitements.
Great, thank you.
How much? Do you have any sense of how much you can reduce the carbon and still
I think
keep that
it depends on which fuel you're talking about. I mean, an algae-based fuel could reduce it by almost like 80-90%. I mean, a considerable amount. The fuels that are coming out of steel plants, effectively you're just using the same fuel twice. So you could say it's a 50% saving. The isobutanol, could be up to sort of 75-80%. So considerable. And the other exciting thing is that the cost of these fuels, I think, will be less than the current fuel price today. So we could actually see the possibility of the cost of travelling coming down, not going up. And that means all that money is not going out of America or out of Great Britain to the Middle East. That money is staying inside the country, which right now we desperately need those kinds of breakthroughs. And I suspect, as an airline owner, I will come to I will go to the Chancellor of the Exchequer in the UK and say, if we can deliver clean fuels in our planes, stop taxing us. Tax somebody else who's continuing to produce dirty fuels. Do not tax the aviation industry, and that should be the carrot that governments give industries.
Dr. Pachauri, there are out there a lot of local government officials or people who speak with local government officials all the time. There are some towns and regions of California that have been working on policies that are not directly because of climate change, but because it works for them. The town of Visalia, where I was a few years back, has a policy now that if you're a developer and you come and say, I want to build something to do with mine. You have to come with your own water. You can't assume the town's going to give you water. You have to know where your water is coming from ahead of time. You're looking at regions around the world. We have a representative of the Netherlands in attendance here. What are the best practices out there in local and regional governments that you've seen that might be applicable in California?
Well, I think firstly you've got to get an estimate and a projection of what impacts are going to be suffered in different parts of a large state like California. And it's not as though that these impacts are going to be uniform. And that requires a substantial amount of sophisticated modeling and downscaling the results of those models to show what's going to happen in one remote corner versus the other. Once you equip local government with that kind of information, then I think it's for that particular location to see what are the measures that are required to deal with impacts that are going to take place in the future. And you've got to prepare for these adequately in advance, because you've got to create local capacity. You may need to invest in infrastructure. I mean, I'll give you the example of the city of Mumbai, where in 2005 there was a massive cloudburst, an extreme precipitation event, as a result of which the entire city was completely submerged. Several people lost their lives, a lot of property was lost. Now, if that kind of event, which took place, let's say, once in 50 years, is now going to take place once in 5 years, then you possibly need to revamp the infrastructure for your entire drainage system, also your transport system, so that people can get away whenever something like this happens. And most importantly, you need an early warning system. So I think what we really need to do is to equip local governments with knowledge of what might happen, and then ask them to create capacity. Some of it could be what you might call low regrets strategies like setting up information systems. And those information systems will have to be two-way because, there are things that might need to be brought to the attention of the governor. Local government may not be able to do everything. So I think those are the kinds of things that we must start doing. And I'm delighted that the governor mentioned the fact that he wants to convert California into a major solar energy and renewable energy state. But I think it's critically important that at the local level, we also create capacity and abilities to deal with the impacts of climate change through adaptation. You need a combination of the two.
And the percentage of public money, state and local, going to infrastructure, storm drains, sewers, various other kinds of pipes, it's diminishing. We're spending less money. And as inequality has continued to increase, there is a real push to compensate with various kinds of support programs, income maintenance, assistance in the form of medical assistance, food stamps, things like that. So you have a real conflict between the demands to ameliorate the increased poverty and hardship, and then often that's done at the neglect of building the basic infrastructure to deal with floods and these extreme weather events. So things are going to get more expensive. And the mantra, of course, is shrink government, keep taxes down, and yet whether it's paying for your water or your electricity or your storm bill, there's a big challenge there. And it's going to be very difficult to communicate the need for investment and to actually get around to making it and getting the money. So that's why I have to quote Mr. Hobbes again when he said, in the state of nature, it's a war of all against all. Bellum omnia contra omnes. I like to put it in Latin so you get a real sense of it.
I thought you would like Latin roots.
I don't like Latin roots, but I like Latin words. So if you're going to use Latin, use it in its pure form. But it's the sense of you have this state of nature, which is not good, and then you have civil society and government and makes everything fine. Well, that's becoming more difficult every year.
There is enormous opportunity. I mean, your president ran on the basis of creating hundreds of thousands of green jobs, and that we have something called the Carbon War Room, which is a centre to try to get 25 gigatons of carbon out of the 25 industries that emit the most carbon, and so obviously aviation is one, shipping is another, but cities is another one, and we convened a meeting with the 25 mayors of the 25 of the biggest cities in Vancouver about a year ago, and asked them, look, why aren't you greening your cities? Why aren't you just cutting? The most carbon comes out of buildings. Why aren't you doing it? And they said lack of finance. So the Carbon War Room went to the financial community and said, well, why aren't you lending to the cities to do it? And they said lack of security. So working with Miami, the Miami mayor or governor worked out that by using the security of the properties themselves, the finances could then lend, and so there's $1 billion investment going into greening, starting to green Miami's city. About 30,000 jobs will be created. And it's, I think the particular scheme itself seems to, make a lot of sense. The finances are secured against the house or against the office itself, and it just, the little bit of extra money just goes onto the rates, or whatever you call them in America, the property tax, and it's a win-win all round. The money does not go to the Middle East. It pays back in 4 or 5 years. Lots of jobs are created, and And I think that can be multiplied up, in a major way. I mean, maybe in California you're already doing something very similar, but it seems to work.
Yeah, there was a program that a dozen or more states passed to lend to homeowners for renewable technologies, and then to put it as a lien on the house. Unfortunately, the federal administration killed the idea. It wasn't the president, but it's this regulator that controls Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. So that still is an obstacle. But we're finding some other alternatives. But that notion of securing a loan on the building makes a lot of sense, and it can be done, I think, prudently. But it does take some imagination and some decision making, and we're going to do that.
I think the point made by Sir Richard is absolutely valid, because we have found in the work of the IPCC and looking at mitigation opportunities that the building sector is by far the most attractive. And I think if one could retrofit buildings to make them more efficient, not only in the use of energy, but also things like use of water, and if new buildings could be built to standards that make the best of knowledge that exists in the field of architecture and building technology, it's really a win-win situation. As a matter of fact, I might mention that overall we have estimated that the building sector has the largest potential for reduction in emissions. And therefore, I think if one can start a program, and California has done an enormous amount already. I know Dr. Art Rosenfeld is here in the audience. There have been some remarkable leaders who have done a lot in California. But I would say the potential is still larger. And I think if this was done countrywide in the U.S., it would make an enormous difference.
And the job creation is enormous. I mean, the regulator, Fannie Mae and whatever, needs to have his head, somebody needs to shake him, because, or maybe some clever way of standing behind him, or, but somebody's got to cut through and sort that out, because, it'd be awful if that's what's holding it back.
Put him on an aircraft and take him through a turbulent place, which might just shake him up.
A one-way ticket to space, I think. But I'd be happy to oblige.
Dr. Pachauri, science has been at the fulcrum of climate change discussions for a quarter of a century now. Science and scientists have been leading the discussion. Going forward, since you all have the scars to show, well, you and your colleagues at the IPCC have the scars to show for your leadership, is the Cassandra role going to be ceded to another institution, like the insurance industry, emergency services industry, financial markets, military? I mean, I ask this of you, but I'm asking it of all three panelists, if you will.
You call it the Cassandra role?
Yeah, well, you've been Latin. I got to be Greek.
Yeah, but if it's a Cassandra, then no one will listen. Cassandra was the person in Greek mythology that nobody listened to. So we would like someone to listen.
Okay. Fair enough. I stand by the analogy anyway, given where we are right now.
Well, may I say this, that I think all stakeholders have to be involved, because this is not going to leave business untouched. What the governor has said about, and what we heard earlier about on the NBC program, that you've had so many extreme events where the loss has been $1 billion or more. We have estimated that worldwide, since 1980, we have had losses, economic or monetized losses, which could be estimated at anywhere from a few $1 billion a year to $200 billion a year in 2005. And that was largely because of Hurricane Katrina. But we must remember that there's some losses you can't monetize. I mean, what do you do about loss of ecosystem services? What do you do about loss of lives? What do you do about loss of cultural heritage? All of that really can't be monetized. And I think on the role of the IPCC, what we are trying to do is to tell the world through scientific work, which involves the best scientists, thousands of them, mobilized and working together without any compensation from the IPCC, purely as a labor of love, is the fact that if we don't do something, the impacts are going to get progressively more negative, and the solutions are so much in the field of attractive options that we ought to get on with it. And we've heard so many co-benefits. Energy security. If you're sending hundreds of billions of dollars to other parts of the world, you're depriving your own citizens of the opportunity to invest that money in doing other productive things. So I think we've got to bring about this transition. And those who are becoming obstacles in implementing what is rational should be made the responsibility of Sir Richard to give this one-way ticket to outer space. Of course, space would be unfortunate to get some of these guys. But
as I recall from my early studies of physics, it doesn't have an atmosphere, right?
Right. If we were in a war situation, which is why we actually called the carbon war room a war, the carbon war room, but I mean, we would be sitting down around a table thinking, okay, all this money is pouring out to the Middle East, and even the Republicans must be able to realize that. Sorry. And then just work backwards from there. How do we? Forget global warming. If you don't believe it, that's fine. But how do you stop? How do we make sure that none of that money goes to the Middle East? That it all stays within our own countries. And as an entrepreneur, I would be able to come up with entrepreneurial ways of doing that. And the end result will be that your country is going to be much wealthier, much better off, and we'll get on top of, for those people that want to get on top of the problems of global warming, we can sort that out as well. But thousands and thousands of jobs can be created, if we just put our mind to it and cut through some of the red tape that is stopping us. And it just seems sad. In America, you don't talk about global warming. You talk about other ways around it because of the Republicans, which is sad. But in a sense, everybody should be on the same page.
I do think the military is warned in some of the recent reports about the threat to national security because of the movement of migration of people throughout the world. It's going to cause military consequences. And then, of course, you have the insurance industry that will be raising rates on people. And, that's the equivalent of a tax. I think the insurance company will know they will, if they can't help us mitigate, as you like to say, then they're going to be perhaps reviled as politicians are because their rates are going to keep going up. So I think there are a lot of others besides government officials that have a role to play besides the IPCC. It's going to take all of the different voices to wake people up and to slowly turn the power of the deniers into an acceptance of an intelligible path forward.
So the point that the governor made that, you've got to take action early, otherwise it's going to be more expensive, is something that is borne out by the scientific assessment of the IPCC. We have said very clearly that if we want to stabilize temperature increase to between 2 to 2.4 degrees Celsius, then if we want to do it on a least cost basis, then global emissions must peak no later than 2015. So that's 4 years away, less than 4 years away. Of course, you can do it later, but that's going to cost you much more. The impacts of climate change will be far worse, and therefore it's rational on the part of global society to think in terms of just getting on with it. And the sooner we do these things, the better it would be not only for this generation, but most definitely for generations yet to come.
I was just going to say another factor is that most reports on peak oil indicate that if we don't have a massive recession in the next year, which is still a possibility that we could have, and if China continues to grow at 9-10%, and India continues to grow at 8%, and South America at 6 or 7%, and Africa at 5%, and even if America and Europe only grow at 1 or 2%, that we could run into peak oil where the demand for oil exceeds supply in about 4 or 5 years' time. If that happens, fuel prices could go to $200 a barrel, and the next mother of all recessions will hit us. So it is another extremely good reason for us to cut through the Freddie and Mac type problems and and just get on with it, and the sooner the better.
Governor, I think I'll make this the last question because I do want a chance for the audience to ask some questions. But it would be to have an environmental panel talking about climate change in California and not ask a couple of specific questions about water would be a sin. So in the case of preparing for climate change, preparing for earlier snowmelts, there is certainly very active consideration now of new ways to get water from the north to the south. I call it the project that formerly known as the Peripheral Canal. There may also be a need with earlier snowmelts to get more storage facilities out there. How do you prioritize that among all the other needs of a government that is strapped for money right now? And how fast do you need to act on some of these things to ensure that everything in the economy that depends on water, which is pretty much the whole California economy, continues to be supplied?
There's been a big process dealing with the protection of the Delta and what is euphemistically called the conveyance.
Formerly known as the Peripheral Canal.
Yeah, and like everything else, it takes a long time. We had a Peripheral Canal proposal written into law, which I signed the last time I was governor, and we had constitutional protections for the Delta and the San Francisco Bay. But that was thrown out in a popular referendum. So we have some of the same people dealing with the same issues. Only now we've learned that they're new creatures that we have to deal with. I didn't know about smelt 30 years ago, and now that's a big player. Smelt has very powerful lobbyists, so we have to deal with them. And we will. But this process that has cost lots of money, I don't know how many, 100 million or more, studying it. There will be a report coming out in the next few months, and based on what they say and the reaction, and there'll be controversy, then we will take some action. And it will cost money. But if we don't do that, and the levees collapse in one of these extreme events, we could run out of fresh water, and that could affect our industry in a very, very significant way. So we've got to take some action, and we're going to need some storage facilities. And that's money, and that's controversy. And like everything else, whether it's a tax or some kind of water canal, conveyance, dam, underground storage, whatever, it's all controversial. And the way we have the system designed, it doesn't take too many people to block and create a lot of chaos and confusion. So that's the real difficulty of a very open society, very vigorous in the exchange of ideas. But we will be taking action sooner rather than later, and we'll be proposing that people spend some more money, and that's always difficult. So, but yes, we're going to do something. I can't tell you what it is because under the California law, we have to have our environmental report circulated, and we have to read it as a decision maker with a fresh eye. And were I to tell you what my predilection is today, I would bias my decision maker's judgment, and our law doesn't allow that. In addition, I haven't really read the damn thing, and so I don't have a bias because I don't know what the hell it is. But we're going to do something, and it will cost money, and it will be controversial, but like other things, we're going to get a lot of things done next year.
We have some questions both from the audience and from the internet. This one I would ask all three of you. I think it's a little more for you, Dr. Pachuri, but China and California are among the world's leaders in setting up markets to control carbon pollution. Well, I'm not sure about the premise, but we'll go on. How can China and California link up their efforts?
Well, that's really for the Chinese authorities and for the governor of California to sort out. But I really think there are enormous opportunities for collaboration between, let's say, a country like China or even India and California. And I would highlight the value of collaborative research and development. Of course, you've got to spell out the division of intellectual property and how that's going to be shared and so on. But it seems to me that's the frontier which has not been exploited so far. And therefore, if you really want to develop technologies that would have a global market in the future, the quickest and the cheapest way of doing that is through collaborative research and development.
We're already collaborating. China and California are collaborating very closely because China is bringing down the cost of photovoltaic cells, and California is buying a hell of a lot of them. So, very nicely, China is bringing down the cost, whether subsidizing or smart investment or hard work or a combination of the above. But Californian companies have been accelerating their purchase of these photovoltaic arrays and installing them, and this is going to speed up. Now, beyond that, I would like to see some of that several $1 trillion in foreign reserves put into California, and I intend to work on that with the Chinese officials. And the Consul General is right here, and we'll be talking about it today, about how we can make it happen.
I just came back from Shanghai, and where they built a hotel in a week. It was open after 7 days from scratch, and it was 95% sort of carbon neutral. It was all done. They were all built in blocks and with cranes, just like a Meccano set, and so I think they will be a leader in clean energy. I mean, and in fact, they're already becoming the leader in clean energy, because they realise that they can't afford to carry on importing all this oil, and it costing them a lot of money. So they're just getting on with it.
Question from the internet, and Governor Brown, I'll give it to you first, but it really could be for everybody. Doesn't California's climate adaptation strategy say first do no harm? In this view, should we not just not put people in high-risk places? And I'd add to that, or should we have a priority of getting people out of high-risk places?
Well, we do that to some extent, trying to avoid building on floodplains. I bought a house in the hills of Oakland, which is 3 miles from the Hayward Fault, right next in a fire zone and a slide zone. But I figured at my age I could take the risk. So we are going to have people living in dangerous areas, but not having any earthquake insurance, I'm taking the risk, and I think people should have to do that. And not ask the state. And unfortunately, some judicial decisions have made the state liable for flood damage for developments. Now, so we have to work out matching the risk and the responsibility. So people know that they're going to pay if something goes wrong. I think that's where we have to, that's the equation. People shouldn't get a free ride. It should be tied together. You want to take the risk, then you pay when things go bad. But of course, that's not the way it works. Every time you have an emergency, they want the governor to declare emergency, and they want someone to pay. We have to wean people away from that when their own actions put them in harm's way.
I had a house in a hurricane zone. Then about 5 months ago, a hurricane went through, and we got at 19-mile-an-hour winds. The lightning hit it, and sadly the house is no more. But we certainly wouldn't want to leave from where we live. We will be rebuilding and back again in 18 months' time. So these things happen.
I think you need a combination of regulation as well as market forces. The insurance industry certainly provides very powerful signals. I know the leader of one business over here, a very well-known industrialist, who has a holiday home in the coastal area of Delaware. And he said he can't get insurance for that now. So when something like that happens, what do? You've got to move somewhere else. But if there are regulations which prohibit, for instance, construction of homes that are obviously going to be in vulnerable areas, then I think that's an added incentive to see that you move somewhere or you just don't build in that location.
I'm sorry, Sir Richard, very quick question for you following up on that. Is there, do you contemplate at all in planning your airline schedules thinking about avoiding airports that could be underwater several days of the year?
No, we don't. I mean, I do think we have to be, as believers in climate, in climate change, we have to be very careful not to exaggerate at all. I mean, I don't think, I think that, some of the things that have happened in the last 5 years may well be related to climate change, but it takes, I think, 10, 20 years to be sure. And it's just, what we just got to be careful of is not to go play into the hands of the climate skeptics. We're not, I don't think in the next few years we're going to see, much in the way of sea level rise. I mean, if you turn the clock forward, 25 years, we could see considerable sea level rise. But we're going to have to lose a lot of Greenland's ice before we see the big levels of sea level rise. And I don't hopefully we're not going to sort of see airports underwater in the short time.
Governor Brown, a question for you from the audience. The state workforce is large, with tens of thousands of employees. It's got a massive vehicle fleet and obviously a large number of buildings. What's the state doing to reduce its own carbon footprint?
That's a good question. I think you ought to ask some of my state personnel that are here next time. I assume we're doing as much as anybody and probably more. I'll tell you one thing, we've gotten rid of a number of state cars, so that's the best reduction of the carbon footprint you can.
Then let me follow up with another one for you, Governor Brown.
And several of my environmental advisors use bikes, so that's good. But yeah, we can move to more efficient fleets and all sorts of ways we're certainly retrofitting buildings, putting photovoltaics on state facilities. We have a number of plans of that. And a number of companies are putting solar panels on their roofs. This is a part of our plan. And so state buildings are just a subset of the larger strategy to encourage the use of rooftops and other land adjacent to buildings. So you have distributed renewable power, and we're doing that.
Okay. And another, please.
Do they? I said Fannie and Mae don't own all your houses in America, so maybe we could talk about the non-Fannie and Mae houses.
We have another little mechanism to finance the installation of renewable technologies. It would work better if we could get this so-called PACE program, which would be able to put a lien on a house. But there's some guy in Washington, was not even appointed by the president, but he's been hanging on a long time, and he is the villain of this piece, and hopefully somebody will remove him at some point in time.
Governor Brown, I think you should be a little careful.
According to the processes of the law.
You had godfathers in America, I thought.
Then.
He's a holdover.
Dr. Pachuri, I want to give you the last word here. How much time are localities going to have to start making preparations? States, localities, businesses, and how much time will they need?
Come to think of it, there is a huge differential in terms of the level of risk that exists in different parts of the world. Now, we have brought out in our recent report that if you look at the number of deaths that have taken place since 1970 or so, as a result of weather-related events, 95% of them take place in the developing countries. If you look at monetized risks, yes, the quantity is much larger in the developed world, but that's largely because you have markets over here. In several parts of the developing world, when massive amount of devastation takes place, there is no monetization of that risk at all. So the point I'm trying to make is that there are some parts of the world where the risk is already very, very high in terms of human impacts.
In California, how much lead time or is this state going to have to get ready?
Well, it seems to me that California really has to look beyond the immediate, and that certainly is being done by the leadership, because there are huge market opportunities. Whatever happens, I mean, irrespective of the kind of resistance we're going to encounter, the world is going to move to a low-carbon future. And I commend the efforts of both these distinguished gentlemen on my sides, because we are going to move in that direction. Businesses who realize that reality are the ones that are going to reap the largest benefits. I think we have been overtaken by a myopia, a very short-term interest in quick and easy profits that are not only inhibiting investments in some of these areas, but they are also resulting in resistance to taking the right kind of actions. So I would say I look at this as an opportunity rather than a threat. Yes, the world overall has a very limited period of time in which we can do things at low cost in a way that minimizes the risks to people, and therefore I think we need initiatives in states like California and other parts of the world, and I think California really has to quicken the pace of developments. This will have major benefits worldwide and of course substantial benefits for California itself.
Well, in regard to water, this is not waiting 25 or 50 years. If the levees that support the flow of water from north of Sacramento going south, if those levees break, that's a huge problem. So we have to do something about that now. It's not 10 years from now. It's not 5 years. We have to take action. And California is not a poor country. It's the 8th largest economy in the world. The aggregate personal income, as measured here, is about this year be about 1.8 trillion. And the growth, even in a high unemployment, high mortgage failure, the growth is about 90 billion. We estimate this year alone, and next year it will be another 100 billion. I'm talking about the total private sector. So there's money here. This is not Greece. Okay, we got our challenges, but we have a huge amount of capital. All we have to do is deploy it. Now, people get very comfortable in the existing flow of money. In order to build the appropriate conveyances for our water, or to build storage, or water recycling, or even desalinization, which is still something we have to experiment with, that costs money. Now, we know when something is important, you can find the money just like that. They want a little town down the peninsula here, wants $1 billion football stadium for 10 games a year. They found $1 billion, just like that. Just like that. A couple of people in Southern California want to have we got 2 people who found $1 billion each to play 10 games a year. We have a couple of people in San Francisco who want to find $800 million. And people down in San Diego, they think they can come up with $1 billion. So if you want it, for relatively trivial reasons, we can find unlimited amounts of money. So for something really important, I think we can find the money. And that's water, that's energy, that's the environment.
And I think that will be the final word. I want to thank all 3 of you gentlemen very much for coming here, and thank you all for attending.